intro. Like, you guys introduce yourself again. I know you've been on the stream before. Introduce yourselves again. It can be, simple. And then we'll kind of go from there.
I'll start. I'm Bill Fisher, and for the context of this, I was the lead game designer on Vanguard. I was one of the founding members of Sigil, so we started in a office with 2 rooms, one giant room and one small room, so Jeff and Brad could make some calls in the back, but otherwise it was a bunch of desks that we built ourselves from IKEA and saw it all the way through.
Right on.
I guess I'll go then. I'm
You can
Doug
go
Cronkite. I was Vanguard was my first actual official job in the industry. I came through the Friends of Brad network, which was real strong, and he didn't get me my job, but he got me an interview, and it went from there. And it was a very eye-opening and intense and frenetic, and I don't have enough adjectives to describe what it was working on that game. It was I'm sure we'll go into it. It was pretty amazing in a lot of ways, and eye-opening in others.
Yeah.
I'm Todd Schmidt. I actually came to Vanguard as a senior programmer, and so I left the EverQuest team, and I was working on a prototype, and then I came over to Vanguard and was there until it became SOE.
Cool. All right. So yeah, I mean, as people could probably tell, this will be a Vanguard focus. I mean, feel free, since you also have strong histories with EverQuest as well. Bounce it in and out of that.
Yeah, we've all also worked on EQ, so
Yeah.
Cool.
So the only tie-over I'll do, I guess, was I came in working on having played around with like the old Neverwinter Nights 2, and that was like building games and stuff like that. And I still remember this, getting in there, and I looked at Tome and I was like, man, these tools suck. And Bill was like, oh, you should have seen what we had on EQ.
Yes.
And oh dear God, because when I went and worked on EQ, Tome would have been like light years ahead of what EQ works, because EQ still uses to this day like a spreadsheet and an access database, and that's it. I mean, that's how you build the game. And so I don't remember if Todd, I don't remember if you were working on the actual tool side of it, or if that was more Ben and Anita, but man, if I could have had,
Yeah, the only thing I ever worked really with was Placer. That was the other
the
in-game tool from the code side. But
that too. Good God. I completely forgot about Placer, because like placing NPCs in EverQuest, you run through the world and you're just logging /log to log locations to a chat log, and then you copy those out and cut them all up and stick them in your spreadsheet, and then
you go
paste
put your
them into the
stuff in
DB.
and you do your ZCDs, so monsters go walk around as opposed to putting down pathing points,
right?
Or, like path nodes and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So I got to say, just to add on to that, when I went on to Rift, right later, much later on, designers were complaining about the tools on Rift, and I was like, oh, well, the tools on Vanguard were worse than this, but the tools on EverQuest, let me tell you how we built things there. And they were like,
tools.
That doesn't seem like it's true, Bill. I'm like, no, that is actually how things were made.
So true.
It may be rose-colored glasses, but I swear, every game I worked on outside of EQ, I wish I had EQ's tool set. Every tool set was more powerful, better, whatever.
Dude, that's not rose-colored glasses. That's just straight up drunk. That's like drunk dialing your ex-girlfriend. That's not rose-colored glasses, bro.
But I've tried to keep it in context the whole time.
We're very easy to do, right? A lot of the basic stuff was very easy to do, and all of the hard, difficult stuff was very difficult to do, right? Where a lot of tool sets these days, the easy stuff is actually difficult to do, and the hard stuff is easy to do. And it's kind of like that. I mean, that different. Like, I didn't work on Swig, right? But the description I always got from the folks that did, right, of like, oh, it's got this amazing scripting system, it can do everything. Like, well, how do you displace a monster? Oh, well, you do like 75 steps. Oh,
yeah,
cool. You know what I do in EverQuest? I write down a loc and I put it in a table and I'm done.
Right.
The NPC appears.
Exactly. It just works. I mean, fiddly bit of how to put them in the right zone number so they don't spawn in the Kino stocks, but
and if they do, sometimes that's funny.
It was a lot actually better than when you were on there, Bill, because for example, a simplest example, I could reload or export and pop a zone in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, that was 45 minutes for me.
Yeah, exactly. And so you had to wait 45 minutes to see if your changes were correct, where I could just repop the zone. And it got even better than that because everybody makes, like I've said in the other VOD, everybody makes their first mistake where they completely break the game, and mine was pushing spells. You create a new spell and you push spells out, and the databases are incorrect, and the server goes, "Whoa, I can't do this," and just shuts the whole zone down. We got to a point where we could reload spells and push them out at will, and so like all your spell changes and stuff were easy to manage, and that just
hot loading kind of changes the whole game, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. When guys are telling me, "Oh, we had a machine that was dedicated to exporting zones, and that was all it did, and if you touched it, people hit you," and like it was just like, yeah, it was pretty crazy. It was the differences from when I worked on it from when you worked on it were, again, night and day, stark stuff. So
yeah.
So as we go, I'm gonna grab some questions, and I'll use this this new little tool that we integrated to plop them up on this screen here, and we'll just kind of hit them as we go. If we're on a roll, I'll let them sit for a little bit, and then when we take a break, I'll grab another one. So we have a couple that have already come in. I'll show.
Cool.
Let's see. We got one. Keebs asked, "Who came up with the amazing minigame crafting system for Vanguard?"
So
was that Salim?
The ultimate work on that was Salim, but right, the vision of that came from like the discussions between Brad and Jeff, Steve Burke, and Capozzi back in the day, right? So there's a lot of stuff laid down in these super high level design documents, right?
Yeah.
And then talented people actually had to translate that into something that functioned. But Salim was the core driving force behind that, like the core implementation.
Yeah.
Have you had Salim on here yet?
I haven't. I've got a list of people that I got to keep reaching out to.
He's a colorful individual.
Literally and figuratively.
Mellowing down a lot.
More figuratively, not the literal, Doug. Come on.
Salim was one of those guys on Vanguard, at least, that you could pretty much count on. There were times when he would be there for multiple days at a time. I mean, Bill did the same thing, where we'd all leave for leave work that night and come back, and those guys are still there banging away on stuff that they had, that those inspired moments and those like, I got to get this done because it's hinging on their work kind of deal. There were, but Salim and JD.
A portion of that though was the when nobody else is in the office, you're able to get so much more done in some cases.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because like Salim and myself had a lot of people coming to us asking us questions.
For sure.
Like there's a lot of interrupt-driven stuff during the day. So it's like, I'm trying to populate a zone. Oh, I got pulled in 7 different directions. Oh, crap, I can't actually do the implementation job that I have to do.
For sure.
While answering questions.
Absolutely. And there were times on EQ where it was the same way for me. It was like I would stay late because I knew I wasn't going to get interrupted and I could get stuff done. Absolutely. Yeah. Totally get that.
So that kind of segues into a question. Milk Crate asks, "What's your favorite part of making games?"
Ooh. For me, it's that momentary just spark of inspiration where you get an idea about something you're working on. Like I can think of a task where I was trying to work on a mission and it just wasn't coming to me, and then I just had something trigger a spark, and like it literally laid out the entire design for the mission and implementation, and I just powered through it in a matter of a few hours, and it was just like those momentary just like creativity sparks that are I haven't gotten that anywhere else. Nowhere else have I gotten that.
Right on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of what Doug is saying there. But for me, it's kind of it's that iterative process and that learning process that happens. You tend to learn some stuff along the way whenever you're doing this, and learning is a great motivator, whether you recognize you're learning or not, right? Every time you do a little experiment, you make a little thing like, oh, I want to make this a little bit better. How can I do that? I'm going to change this variable. I'm going to change that variable. I'm going to modify it this way. Oh, it feels better now. So what did I learn? I learned how to make X scenario feel better in the context of what I'm making. So I really enjoy that, right? That kind of honing in on something better. And when you have the time to actually do that, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's like, oh, let's just get the content out the door because that's what we got to do. But when you can improve something and make it better, that's always felt like leveling up to me, right?
Yeah,
for sure.
Todd?
Well, from my experience, it's it's actually been pairing up with a design person or another team member and hashing out the details of a system and actually then seeing it come together. I did a lot of the stuff related to housing. So I worked with Kurt Wagner like a ton on that stuff. And even though the design document was like 5,000 pages and we made like page 5 of implementation, it still felt great to get some of that out the door and actually usable in players' hands. I think really the best thing is getting it up in front of players and having them not call it complete shit is great.
I mean, even if they call it complete shit in some cases, it's still a great feeling to get it in front of people, right?
For sure.
It's getting that feedback, that visceral feedback one way or another. And there's always like a percentage of people, no matter what. Like, I don't think I've ever had a feature that's been like universally loved or universally reviled, right? But there's always some guy that's like, I could do this better. Why didn't you do it this way? My druid
would take 50. It would take 15 minutes to make this right. Why didn't you do it this way? It's like,
right.
That's the polite one. That's the polite version. As opposed to, I could have done this in 15 minutes. You should be fired. You should never work in games again. How dare you?
Kill yourself, right? Like,
that's de rigueur for the industry.
Yeah, pretty much.
Anything you did, somebody else could have done in 10 minutes, and you're an idiot and you shouldn't have your job. And that's
right. Their years of experience translates directly.
Clearly,
and it does in some cases.
Some cases it does.
Get in the arena, guys. Get in the arena. Right?
Yeah.
Like, you're not in the arena unless you're out here making games. So
that's because I can clearly remember being a player and being so upset about certain things and thinking that way and thinking, oh, what the hell are you doing? This would be so simple to fix. And then you get behind the curtain. It's like, yeah, I should have just shut up back then because I didn't know what the hell I was talking about.
Well, I mean, here's the amazing thing about players, right? Hundreds of thousands of players are going to know more about your game because they're living in it.
Right.
Like, there are people that play 24/7. We've all been that guy at one point in time. Right.
Yeah.
Like, we did know things as players that the developers didn't know, in my opinion, right?
Or we thought we did.
The developers, they have a different view on the product than we have a view on the product, right? So they have these very different insights as an end user than we do as a developer.
Absolutely.
Even if we're playing the game ourselves, right? Like, it's like a dramatic difference. And when you can extract that information from them and see their perspective, or you can get them to see some of your perspective, some good things can happen, obviously, right?
Yeah, definitely.
There's this level of translation that has to happen between the player is saying X needs to happen. Okay, no. Let's take a step back. What is it you're actually asking for? Are you asking for this class to be balanced versus that class? Because saying, make Mighty Strike 10 times better because the wizard ability is 9 times better isn't really.
No, that's just I want to be more powerful. That's all that is. And
yeah. But
and
being live with other players.
At the same time, you kind of want those people that passionate because when they stop talking, that means your game's dead.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. If nobody's complaining, you got a problem. I mean, that was one of Brad's mantras back in the day.
Yeah, you shove something out the door and they go, well, this completely sucks. Well, it still means they care enough to tell you that it sucks. If they don't care, they just leave and they don't play. And then you don't, then it doesn't matter if it sucks or not because you don't have players.
For all of the faults of Vanguard, which there are many, 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 many faults, right? There is a subset of people that absolutely adored it and loved it.
Well, there's people today that still want the game back. They're like, why can't they release it as why can't you guys put it out as
smiles. I just see Todd smiling when you say that. Todd, have you met any of those people before? Are you one of them?
Yeah, I'm actually a huge fan of Vanguard. It's actually, besides EverQuest, it was, even on EverQuest, I stopped playing at some point. The only time I was playing was because I don't want to say forced to play, but we were, as engineers, we were later on in the expansions forced to experience the high-end content, right? Because we didn't have time to play as much. Where Vanguard, we had a healthy beta or alpha, and we always had players in there, so I was always playing with them. And then even after launch, I was still playing because I was working on the game. I was in there with players. I treated it a lot like Alcabor at the time. Like, it was because when it came back to SOE, I would lead on it. So it was just, I was involved in it every day trying to make the game better. And it was more from the technical side, but we had a small army of artists and designers still trying to polish up the game. And so I would say that's like, I would love to bring it back. I think from a tech side, there really isn't any current technical issues, right? Because I mean, back then the game barely ran with all the settings turned on. Obviously, hardware has kind of solved that problem today. From the content perspective, when it relaunched in, what was it, 2010? It was probably the most polished product I would say on the market besides WoW in terms of content. And the depth of the content still is still all there. You know, those crafted, all the different spheres and all the side jobs you could do. You don't see that. I haven't seen that in other games. It might exist in some part, but I still think that content's more compelling than most games right now.
It tells you something, though, that there's still such a large number of people, like on a regular basis, that ask for it. There's asking, hey, why can you talk to people and see if they can bring it back? Can you do this? There's a guy, I think, working on, I don't know if it's in a browser or if it's trying to do his own client, like a P99 kind of client for Vanguard. But there's clearly people that would love to get that. And I mean, I don't know how you'd even approach that from a licensing standpoint or from a legal standpoint, but
well, I can tell you, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
So there's still an audience. There's still an audience. So
yeah. So slightly different topic, but I want to get some of these questions that came up a bit ago done so that we can continue to sort of delve into some of these other topics. I'll show this one and I'll read it out. So Airho TV asked, where did you begin learning C++? I work in JavaScript, Python, want to get serious about learning something closer to machine language in order to get into back-end, front-end game development. So I don't know how many of you this is applicable to beyond Todd. Todd, is this yours? You got this one?
Yeah, sure. The first thing you need to do is find a project. If you really have no experience, find something out there that's open source that you want to play with. Modify it to be your own. You know, I started with Circle Mud. So this was, you know, back in 97, 98. Me and some friends created our own mud, right? And I wrote a world generation tool, which was insane because it generated hundreds of thousands of rooms that were pre-populated with canned text and stuff like that. And I put it on the server one day, and everyone thought we had like 1,000 people creating text content. I'm like, no, it's all randomly generated. And then, you know, it sucked because it was randomly generated, but, you know, just stuff like that, because you can actually see it work, and then you can learn from that. As for the actual syntax, just, you know, install Visual Studio Community Edition 2019 and start with Hello World and go with it. I mean, there's tons of sample programs out there. You can probably find anything online. There's open source engines you can download and play with, stuff like that.
And there's, it kind of feels like there's a little bit of a segue to the response here to the previous discussion, which was, you know, there's some really interesting work being done in the emulation communities. So if you look at like the EQ Classic community on Discord and the work they've been doing, you look at the various projects that are out there, there's some really fun stuff going on. And what I've found just sort of poking around in the EQ related emulation communities, I guess, is people are super open. People are very helpful, and they're doing a lot of interesting stuff. So seems like there's plenty of opportunity to kind of dig in. All right. So another question is, I'm just here for the war stories. Any features or in-game systems that you thought would have been incredible but didn't make it or didn't play out as well or didn't make the cut?
The original design for housing, actually, like there was a city system attached to everything originally in the design documents for Vanguard, right? So it was kind of like the cities were supposed to be kind of like The Sims. So you'd have like a city master, and then everyone would be working on basically filling up the bars of the city by doing activities and whatnot. So I don't think that ever really got there, did it, Todd? Like anything even close to that?
The infrastructure was there, but the content never got implemented. So basically, we had like in Vanguard, for those of you who played, the housing was in world, right? There was no instancing, and there were generally houses laid out in a village style. And the idea being that your guild would purchase all the houses in the village. You cooperate towards a community center, well, a pillar, whatever you want to call it, and then that village be part of a
Wonders,
like, and then basically, as you leveled up those pieces, you could build. The idea was to build public works projects, if I remember correctly. Like it was some type of community, thing. And then, depending on what you did, NPCs may come attack, and there was like all kinds of plans like that. I don't remember some of the details because I'm like, oh, we're never going to get to that.
Yeah.
So the thing on Vanguard that I remember most that I thought literally every game after that was going to take was the defensive target, because you had your offensive target and your defensive target, and I thought that was utterly brilliant from an MMO side of things, and it just didn't seem to go it didn't seem to go anywhere, and I was really shocked.
It did go somewhere. They put it in Warhammer Online, and it was fantastic.
Remind me on that one, because it rings bells.
It was
almost.
I thought it was I thought it was like one of the, as silly as it sounds, it's a little thing, right? But it was revolutionary in the way it made the games play.
It changed the texture of being a healer or a tank or anyone, right?
Yeah. Because I didn't feel like I had to be just click, 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 trying to just, it didn't,
so what came first, the defensive target or the defensive abilities?
Defensive target was in the original designs of the game, because I was trying to harken back to the days of MUDs for both healers and for tanks, like the rescue ability, right? Like back on the MUDs, right? You rescue Todd. Oh, so he's no longer being hit. So that was part of the impetus. So we were like, how do we get that into the game? And that was probably like a day 10 thing on Vanguard thing that we kind of decided, and I pushed forward and we said, let's do this in the actual game. And from there, we just kept building on the defensive abilities and everything else.
I was really shocked that didn't get immediately adopted by a lot of other games, because of how much it made the gameplay feel more. It made the gameplay feel better.
But
you just have to fight targeting.
Yeah,
stuff,
I was.
But basically,
I'm still to this day surprised it isn't everywhere.
It was, if I remember correctly, and based on your description there, it was as simple as I maintained two targets. I had an offensive target and a defensive target. It was a static target.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're totally going to steal that for Project N. Like, why hasn't that been used?
What is Project N? I haven't heard about Project N.
Project N. So we've been spending it's oddly sort of the stream has evolved in weird ways. Like, first thing that happened was Keebs and some other people were like, you should have guests on. So we started getting, I was like, that actually makes sense. Let's get guests, right? Who the hell wants to sit and hear me all the time? So get guests. And so that's been really cool. But then we've been the whole time kind of going, like, we're playing a lot of EQ and we're like, man, we love this game. And it's not like this style of gameplay, this pace of gameplay, the simplicity of the world design in terms of like the old graphics and everything. Like, it's not like we're enjoying it. People are still playing it. It's not like in order to make an MMO, you have to abandon those things. And so what we started talking about was like, this feels like a genre that's just kind of got left behind, but it's still its own genre. And so then we started going, okay, if we were to make EverQuest, what would we want in EverQuest? What would we change about EverQuest, right? And then more and more, we started talking about this damn thing so much that I was like, we should probably stop calling it EverQuest. We'll call it Project N. Which was kind of a riff on Todd's Project M, but we're also we use the N because it's rooted in nostalgia. Like, all right, so if we wanted to make like that thing that every time I listen to like Blue Oyster Cult and picture myself driving a van with like a unicorn painted on the side, and it's full of Dungeons and Dragons books.
You want to be transported back to another time, right?
Exactly. I want to go back in time, right? And so if we took simple world design, like very blocky graphics, painted, blah blah blah, could we make a game, on a budget? And so we've been running the numbers and stuff, blah blah blah. So we're doing a little bit of concept work. We're doing some prototyping now, doing some projections. So yeah, if you're interested, hit me up. We'll talk about what's going on with Project N.
I'm consulting around, so if you want to consult, you let me know.
All right. So yeah, that's Project N, and now Project N sounds like it might need a quick little blurb about defensive targeting.
Yeah, you guys should do defensive targeting. I'm the creator of it. Do it.
All right.
Yeah, I thought it was.
It's
I
a
thought
great
that
feature.
was.
I mean, I
Yeah,
think the
thought-
reason, Doug, that it didn't get put into more games was right. WoW came out, and that became the de facto standard for how everything was going to be done. For
dear
everything
God.
else that copied it from there on out. But the folks on Warhammer realized, right, because Warhammer Online was the Mythic folks, right? It was a game built by Daok, right?
Yep.
So I think they saw that in Vanguard and were like, oh, this actually makes a lot of sense. We should do that too. So
Is
I mean,
that-
I mean,
was
I
that
played
always
out of
there?
that.
I played a lot, but I don't remember it. I guess I don't remember there being that defensive targeting in there. Was that added
Yeah, there was-
later?
No, it was in there from the beginning. Maybe it was a toggle. I'm not sure. Maybe you didn't notice it.
I never played a healer, so maybe that was.
I played a Zealot from the beginning, right? Like I was the first. I was, I think, the fourth renown rank 80 on the server I was on. So I did a lot of healing. I did a lot of healing.
Yeah, I never played a healer, so maybe that's why I didn't notice it. I was.
But you could, with some of the tanks, you could put stuff on your defensive target. So,
Maybe
anyways,
I just don't remember. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I haven't seen any games besides Vanguard or it do it since then, really.
Yeah.
Because everything became target through target, like EverQuest 2, right? And then Rift, and to some degree WoW, right?
Yeah.
Oh, where you're taking the target of the target you're fighting.
Yeah, like if you're a healer,
Yeah.
right? I'm healing Todd, and I'm casting through at his target, right? Instead of slash assist and whatnot.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all just different approaches that the games use, and some people like some, and others don't others. But I feel like the defensive target gives you more texture and options to the gameplay.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's interesting. It's absolutely worth playing around with and iterating on and seeing the feel for it. Oh, so the other thing, and then I'll shut up about rambling about Project N. But the other thing that we're doing with it too is we're blabbing from the beginning. We're just doing it. We're showing concept art on stream. We're talking ideas on stream. We're just basically going to be open from the onset and see what happens. Naturally, people are probably going to get bored shitless about like 3 months into it. And they're like, "Where's the finished game?" But then we can also talk about why that's not actually a reality. Right. So it should be interesting. I'm going to pull another question here, unless you guys had another like thing that didn't make the cut that you want to hit on now. We good?
All the other content. I mean,
all the other content.
Man.
And then I want to get back to that topic again in a minute, just to talk about the iterative design process and how much you think documenting shit up front versus just sort of going is worthwhile. Blah blah blah. But all right, so I'm going to read this one from Landon. Speaking of emulation and yeah, so Landon, I don't want to misrepresent how I found you guys, but I first heard of Landon through the EQ Classic Discord, where basically I get all my like Lantern info and like P99 folks and blah blah blah. So anyways, Landon asked, how much were you involved in world building, and if so, did you prevent yourself from going too far down the rabbit hole, or how did you prevent yourself from going too far down the rabbit hole when hashing out details and get a world building project done in a deadline?
So it depends on what you mean by world building, because there's so many different aspects of that. Like there's the technical side of world building, where like somebody's in there doing art. I don't think you're talking about that. I think you're talking about like setting up the world of Vanguard and the lore and everything else like that, and like this continent's going to exist and here's the people that live there and X, Y, and Z, right? Like,
I don't know.
In the early days. Yeah, well, actually, if the person asking wants to clarify, that'd be great.
Yeah, Landon. So, what do you mean there?
The rabbit hole of the world building from the art side. You're familiar with what didn't make it into Vanguard. I consider that a giant rabbit hole of being planned, and then the Vanguard world being like 10% of
that
what
stuff was mandated to be planned, because the grand plan was basically everything that you see launched in Vanguard was supposed to be like. Actually supposed to be a little bit bigger. So Kojan was supposed to be a full continent the size of Kalia and geez, I'm blanking. What was the name of the other continents?
Thestra, Kalia, Kojan.
Yeah, Thestra.
That's
right.
it.
So Kojan was supposed to be the same size of those. It wasn't originally supposed to just be a little island archipelago, right? Like that was the hammer of, we got to cut stuff coming down. Like we don't need to create more of these zones covering these level ranges. But the game was, in the high level designs, done from the very beginning to plan out like 3 to 4 expansions. So those continents were the starter zones. And then the first expansion would have been a series of 2 to 3 other continents, roughly those size. And then after that, there was this monstrosity called Avra, which I think
oh my God.
it had like 12 nations on it, maybe 10 or 12 nations within it. It was a true like Forgotten Realms, gigantic, massive, overarching ideal, like a true massive world, like anything so far beyond EverQuest at the time, at least, right? And I think it was like 700 kilometers by 700 kilometers or something, at least.
It was more chunks together than the rest of, or than the entire other part of the world together, if I remember correctly. It was enormous.
Yeah.
It had, I think it was, I want to say 700 chunks long or something. Like it was 700 long by, God, I just remember if the map was to scale, I remember it being ungodly big and looking at it going, how the hell are we ever going to populate all that?
Yeah. Brad and Jeff really wanted us to have a plan for where we would go next, right? And have that planned out from the beginning of where we go next so that we could kind of manage the, but in EverQuest, right? It was like, okay, here's EverQuest. Okay, here's Kunark. Oh, here's Velius. This progression of things getting, more and more outlandish and cool and mighty and everything. And then you're in Plains of Power. Or, well, actually, you're in Luckland. I try to forget that. Then you're in Plains of Power, and it's like, they're like, oh, where do you go from there? Right? I didn't play EQ past that point. So
the ever-present, look, another continent behind the veil. It's like,
right,
how did we not know that was there?
Right.
It's like,
but a portion of it for them was the scale kind of what you're fighting, right? Like in the initial game, they didn't want you killing gods off the bat, right? Like there needed to be this power scale of, yes, in Vanguard, you literally were killing rats, or at least rat people in the beginning, right? And then you scale up to fighting, Ifrit and whatnot. Where do you go from there, right? The things that you'd fight on those other continents, some were somewhat mundane and others were much more grand.
So did you, this is something we've been talking about a good bit lately. Did you feel like at that point, the recognition that these games are going to be around for quite a while kicked in, and it was like, all right, so let's go ahead and build in the headroom now and just say, instead of you going from like, fire beetles to gods in like the next 60 days, we're actually going to have you kind of spend a solid couple months killing bullshit, and then you're going to work your way up, and then in year 5 you may actually be fighting a dragon. Was there more of that sort of?
There was a, in the beginning, right? And this all kind of changed during development because that's what happens during development, right?
Sure.
There was very much that push from Brad and Jeff saying, oh, I don't want us to repeat X mistake that we feel we made on EverQuest, right? Which was we just scaled too quickly out of stuff. And now we're in like, because at that time, right, I think Plains of Power was out by the time we were starting
by then,
this.
we had shipped pop.
Right. And they were like, oh man, they've literally just killed all the gods in EverQuest. Where are they going from here? Let's make sure we don't do that.
Right.
And I know Brad already had some feelings about that of like, oh, you already killed the dragons in EQ, like way back in the day. But like dragons for us were going to be a thing in, I think it's not Hattersea. I forget the name of the dungeon that at least never shipped when I was there. The Dark Elf one in the southwest of Kalia, Doug or Todd. Do you guys remember the name of what it was supposed to be?
Oh, good God.
It was bad.
I mean, we had the area. We had the area populated with the residents around it, but I don't know if the dungeon ever got built by the time it went out. Hathorsey?
Hathorsey, it might have been.
Hathorsey.
There was a Hattersea and there was a Hathorsey because there was a multiple of those. The whole Dark Elf stuff.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah,
man, that was a while ago.
like that was supposed to be. Like it was supposed to be live content, and that was like the realm of the Dragon King sort of thing, and there would be one dragon in there sort of thing, but then the other continents would have been.
I mean, when we launched, like the Overland Giants were some of the bigger content at the time. They were the
the
outside world bosses.
The raid zone that was finished.
It was after launch,
yeah, and that was polished up when it was back at SOE. But Hathorsey or whatever. Pankorsey or whatever it was.
Oh, that's it, Pankorsey. Jeez.
Wasn't Pankorsey? Wait, wasn't Pankorsey the starting city?
I don't remember.
Man, my memory is so bad.
We had to name all this crap quickly and then like build off like here's kind of the Dark Elfish language sort of stuff.
Right. And so
that one I don't remember being finished when it was relaunched. There might have been some content in there, but I don't seem to remember it being actively paid.
The big raid area that I remember after launch was the one, I think Andrew worked on it. What was the big
warehouse?
That's it. Yeah, that kind of went back to the feel for me of honestly like a Plains of Power where you had a lot of raid content in there that was really, progression from one area to the next, and it was extremely well done, extremely well thought out.
I remember it broke our combat system completely. Like I remember having to, before I left, trying to help solve problems with like, everyone being one shot. And I remember the conversations. I don't remember the content of the conversations about this stuff, right? Like, the mob switch targets and just one shots wizards. Oh, maybe we shouldn't do that.
Smoked that guy.
Yeah.
So, when you're planning something like that, what did it look like in the background? Was it did you have pretty heavy documentation? I mean, you just whipped out a design doc, but
in the very, very beginning, for some of our deliverables to Microsoft, right, we had what we called our HLDD, right, which is just super, super high concept, covering kind of like all the crazy high level systems you could have, and that was multiple hundreds of pages. Like it was bigger than you'd ever read. But it was something that Microsoft had wanted originally. And then we had our LLDD, which is something I might have flashed on the screen there, which just had slightly more detail and a lot more of the lore, world building details sort of stuff. So that actually has like all of the maps built in Map Maker, just like if you were reading through a Forgotten Realms source book, like and reading about Fae, right? Like you might see, here's 4 paragraphs about what Fae is about and a note about the Red Wizards. And maybe here's the sort of stuff that you might encounter in a random encounter in Fae. And then some like keywords for inspiring the concept art, some mood words, stuff like that of like, this area is, Western European focused and blah, 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 ancient field tower and such and such, right? So that sort of documentation at a super high level existed before any artists were on the team even.
Yeah.
All of that stuff was like, there wasn't a roadmap, I'd say, but there was a list of shit that was like the campaign. These are places that you could go in this world if you were living in this world, and you could have run a D&D campaign off of it.
I'm probably going to be on mute for a little bit. My yard guys just showed up, so there's a leaf blower and weed whacker outside.
So
I can't hear anything in the background though. You're fine so far.
On a smaller scale, every time we did an expansion on EverQuest, and granted this is not Vanguard, but every time we did an expansion, it was somewhat like a smaller version of that thing that Bill was talking about, where you'd have to really go through and write out what each zone was going to feel like and what's the lore behind this, and here's some reference art to show kind of the feel we want to go for, and like you said, mood words that describe you're trying to convert a whole lot of designer gibberish into something that artists can turn into the zones that we see. And that includes populations and what the general feel of the gameplay is going to be. And so that's kind of just a small nugget of the same thing, and you kind of just stack those all on top of each other, and that's how you get a big world.
And then you start pushing that through kind of, I don't want to like be totally
the iterative process again.
You start pushing it through the artists and the concept, and you start getting stuff back. And like one of my favorite experience always is like you write some words on paper and you're like, this sounds okay, or this is, derivative of this. And then a concept artist grabs it. And you get back and you're like, holy crap, that is so much cooler than I described. Like, that is one of those things where early on of like, I don't need to put a million details into this thing, or like, let me phrase it this way. You don't want to paint so clear a picture with your words that the people that are good making pictures can't make a better picture than your words. Right, your words are there to inspire that amazing picture, that amazing world, right? Like, you're not trying to have artists photocopy what's in your mind, because what's in your mind, I mean, there's some lucky people that are like able to describe the mightiest worlds, the most amazing things, right? But you move that onto an artist that's talented with that, man, it just gets so much better.
And it's funny.
Absolutely.
It's, like I love just engaging concept art as quickly as possible. Like we were already doing it with like Project N, because the degree to which you get inspired, like when you see it and like start thinking of other ideas, or just get hyped on the fact that, oh shit, we can make more of that. We can make, throw more ideas out there that this person can turn into something tangible.
So when I was on EQ, and it's really kind of a sad note again. One of the guys that I relied upon for that stuff was James Rochelle, and I would give him little documents, and man, it would come back, and I'd be like, "Holy Christ! I didn't have that idea," and it would just, it one of those things that just kind of fed off each other, and it just blew me away. Like I could give him this document, and go, "Here's what I want to do," and he'd come back with this concept art, and I'd be like, "Holy crap! Let's totally go that direction," because it was just like oh my god. And he unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but he was one of those guys like Bill was talking about. You give it to a guy who's really good at making pictures, and they come back with things that you just never would have imagined in your own words, kind of thing. And that feeds off it, because then you get inspired on the design side to push that even further, and then they come back with more stuff, and then you hand it off to a guy who actually makes the zones, and they put their little spin on that concept, and now it's just this. It grows in.
Right?
Oh yeah.
I think that's also
insane.
That's
so good.
That's one of the cool things about sort of experience as well, where over time you kind of get a bigger network of people that you've worked with, where you're like, oh, if I could take this thing we're discussing, but have this particular artist do it in her style, I can imagine how this would start to turn out, right? And it's like you can start to picture these, the end result a bit in advance, but you're never going to get it. You're still going to be blown away when you see it, right? So that's one of those things where I was like, I'll be honest, like at the beginning of the year, I was just kind of like, man, I don't know if I want to work in games anymore. Any startups? Like, so I'm poking at like startups and shit. And the more we started talking about that, and the more we started engaging this process, I'm like, why making games is so satisfying, along with being such a giant, just pain in the ass.
Well, making games in that mode is fun, right? The collaboration, like the old EQ style of making content, even some of them worked on Vanguard, right? Where you have a high level concept and you run with it with a group of people. Today, a lot of the cranked out AAA titles, I don't feel like that happens at all. There's a guy who makes items, there's a guy who makes assets, there's a guy who does this, a guy who does this, and they don't communicate. They're given direction on what to specifically create, and it just gets boring, right? I mean, it's just cookie cutter content. I can see that happen at later Daybreak titles, where it's just, oh well, we don't have a gun to fill this spot. Make this gun this way, look like this, and there's no freedom.
It's designed by production / designed by spreadsheet to a degree of like, we don't have X feature, put X feature in. It's going to work exactly this way. Right. Don't iterate on it. It's just going to be that.
Well,
I can speak to that in a way.
Free roams was one of those things where it was a high level concept, and we told the artists just to make crazy shit. Like, make whatever you want. It's a high fantasy kids based game. There's nothing you can make that would feel out of place other than probably a gun. But I mean, you could create anything else and it would fit. So they made crazy stuff, and it was fun.
I was fortunate to work with some pretty. I mean, in the very beginning, I dropped in, and one of the first artists I got to work with was Keith, and Jesus, could that guy do that same thing? I went to I remember having a meeting with him about spell effects and just little things like that, and talking with him, and just his ability to take idiot words from me and turn them into amazing things. That collaborative thing with artists and Alan Bond on EverQuest making zones out of our gibberish was.
Man,
there's been some.
Alan, that's a name I haven't heard in a while.
That dude is a wizard for real. That guy is a wizard for real. Because, he's.
That's so rad to hear that name. Awesome.
He's still on EQ, last I heard.
Speaking of Tom Toby, we have an old Tom Toby question. It's been sitting in here.
Toby's
in the
chat.
Yeah, Toby's even asking questions. So I'm going to show his question real quick.
Oh, God.
And his question is...
I'm still not coming back and finishing my bugs, Tom. You can suck it.
For Todd, how smooth a transfer was it going from SOEQ to Vanguard? I haven't heard of all that went on when you guys left.
Well, for me specifically, I transitioned off of EQ somewhere in Gates. I don't remember specifically, and I was asked to work on an unannounced project. It ended up being called, like, the R&D was, we took the EQOA engine, updated the PC version of it, and created a streaming client. And then the idea was that we would have a truly streaming MMO. And we basically integrated some of, like, a better UI, click to move, some stuff like that, took out some of the complicated, well, it wasn't complicated, but just made some simple enhancements to it. I'm just going to toss it out there. We did the demo for it. It was interesting because the entire game consisted of one file that was 256 kilobytes, and that streamed down the entire game to your client. Because, I mean, if you think about it, the technology for EQA back in the day was streaming off of a CD on a PS2.
Yeah.
Today, that hardware at that time was mind-blowing compared to what the PS2 hardware was. So we were easily able to do that. And the intent was and then basically the direction on that changed. Leadership changed, and I think at that point I got contacted by Lawrence and Jeff and Bill, and they're like, "Hey, come to Vanguard." So I was like, "Yeah, this isn't turning out exactly how I had planned, so I'm out of here." But anyways, that game went on to become.
We were real happy to have you, Todd.
Yeah,
we were
not
real happy to have you.
But that Fantastic Realms is what ended up being what the next iteration of that was Free Realms. So yeah, then I worked at Vanguard, worked with these guys for a couple years. I guess it wasn't even 2 years before launch. So I missed, like, most of Vanguard development. I came in more to help with, again, housing. I think that was the selling point for me to come over, was housing, and then I ended up doing a lot of optimizations in the back end. And then the transition back to SOE, I was basically told, "You're coming back to SOE," and I was like, "Oh, okay."
There you go.
Not to go too off on a tangent, but you mentioned EQOA. If there's a game I could bring back with today's hardware, that'd be it.
A lot
Because
of
that
people
game
ask
was
about it.
literally a year or two too early to work. It was, I mean, you think about people had to buy that little module to go on their PS2 so they could dial into the game. If you put that on today's framework, that game was so good and so far ahead of its time, it's crazy. I would love to bring that one back.
Yeah,
I mean,
a lot of people come in here asking about it. Sorry, Todd?
So we had an engineer on Vanguard in the early days, AR. I don't know if you guys remember AR.
Slicer.
Yes.
I remember AR.
I worked with him again, actually, on Rift.
Okay.
Over at Facebook now, but he was a huge EQOA player. I always remember that. So he was kind of starstruck by Amanda back in the day because she had worked on it, right? Like, and Lawrence and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, he would always still reference, even on Rift, he would reference some of the EQOA stuff. So,
and just real quick,
I just think
a quick bit of housekeeping, outside note, because I'm still figuring out how to do some of this stuff. Those, like, Bootly, thank you for gifting people subs. Hyde, thanks for the bits, subs, bits, all that stuff. I'm just gonna wait till the end and thank everybody for it, but I definitely appreciate it. I'll have you know that all of that basically goes straight into concept artists' pockets at this point. So that's where all the Twitch money goes. So thanks.
The Dantron. Is that your brother?
No, Dantrin is my brother.
Oh, I was like, I recognize that name.
One of the 2 QA members of
Exactly.
2 QA people, yeah. If you think there was bugs in the game, hey, maybe it's because there was a QA manager who's an amazing guy, and 1 QA person who is my brother.
Was that Ed?
Ed Hawking, yeah.
Ed was the QA manager, and he managed your brother.
He also did all the testing and the planning and all that sort of stuff.
He did the building too, if I remember correctly. He would manage the builds as well.
Yeah,
got pushed out to the servers, but yeah.
Probably, yeah.
That's funny.
Great guy, loved him. But yeah, my brother has his own little horror stories to tell of. Like, he knew exactly how to hit, like, level 7 in the fastest amount of time because that was part of his smoke test every time we were to do a release, right? Like.
Yep.
So we got another question from Zoidberg. Let me show it here. Zoidberg asks, I know that hindsight is 2020, but did you ever have the discussion of revamping the available world / content instead of adding new content, or does that not bring revenue in that a new expansion does? And I'm curious.
The model back then was definitely release expansions, right?
Yeah.
It was very focused on the EQ1 style of doing things. Like, yeah, we cared about retention, and we there was some high level care about like the existing world and making it feel somewhat fresh, but that wasn't like a focus back then at all. I think in today's games you have to kind of care about that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the business side of it pushed it. I mean the sell through on expansions was 75+%. So
well, and it's really hard to convince somebody to buy stuff they already have. Yeah. And that was always the marketing side. It's like, we can't sell people the content they already have. It's like, why wouldn't you just put this in the game then? It's like, that's the unfortunate reality of trying to make money in the industry. Is
on a sub-based game, right? Like
there's a PR angle too, right? Like so you can spend a lot of time even doing you can spend a lot of time keeping the world like fresh and alive and revamped and all that stuff, but you have to have something for the PR people to go out and make a splash and go, this big thing's going on, which now we've learned that you can do that with leagues or seasons or other shit. You don't have to put a box on the shelf, but I think back then there wasn't really that thought.
Well, the box on the shelf and then the print articles, like it was for some reason it was like the old Sony style of advertising, which was you have to put something in magazine, and so you had to have that done 6 months in advance.
Yeah, and if you get the cover, great, fantastic, job well done. We got the cover.
Right.
Because that stuff used to matter to a large degree, but I mean, so many of these games now, like the best PR is word of mouth.
Right.
The best PR is somebody that's evangelizing your game to every one of their friends and bringing 10 of their friends with them.
And you don't need the PR firms shoving things down your throat, because you've got 100,000 websites that are crapping out articles
to do that, right? Like
yeah, exactly. It's much more immediate. There's no 3-month lead time on a print magazine. There's no. But I mean, I fought that battle with marketing and PR continually when I was in leadership on EQ. It was, even fighting them versus what our players were telling us they wanted. You gotta go, well, we gotta sell something. What can we do what can we sell them? And it's like, well, we can sell them the fact that they're getting more content in the great game they love playing, and that wasn't enough. That wasn't a marketing blurb. It wasn't exciting for them. So I
mean, when I think about stuff like on Rift, right, you're either building stuff to attract new players or to keep the players that you have, right? So you have these different buckets of content and types of things that you're making, and different beats that you're putting out to, if you want to call it marketing, PR, whatever, right? But to evangelize your product. So it just really comes down to like, what's going to make, like, if Todd quit playing my game 3 months ago, what can I put in the game that will make Todd come back for another 3 months, right? And be, I'm going to sound evil for a moment, right? Because Rift was a free-to-play game once I converted it, right? Like, if I don't have you as a user in my game playing my game, I can't make money off of you, right? Which is
absolutely true.
Dramatically different than just the subscription-based game. Because in subscription-based games like EverQuest, dude, we didn't, at least back when I was on it, we didn't really look at the engagement so much as we did the subscription number, right? Like, we would occasionally look and be like, oh, not as many people are logging in. That's kind of weird. But they're all still paying, so I guess it doesn't matter, right? There was many people that just had that recurring sub and forgot about it completely, or just wanted to keep their character around with like that very idle threat of like, oh, eventually delete your character, which we never did, right? Like, we wiped names.
Never did.
Like, but yeah, it's a different world being subscription based, being free to play, being freemium, being something in between. But I think it also depends on like this. I know we kind of started this question with like, what about revamping the old world and stuff? Right? Like, you have to ask yourself the question of what is the purpose of us revamping the old world, right? Is it to make the new user experience better? Is it to make the flow through the game better for new users? Is it to draw old users back to those areas? Because sometimes you have stuff that works. Like, on EQ1, we talked about it before, and I think Burke probably talked about it, right? Like, we did that revamp of Kazakh Thule into a high-level zone. But what we also did was take Kazakh Thule away from our player base that enjoyed it as a low-level zone.
Right.
Right. That wasn't an instance. That wasn't an alternate version. It wasn't like you take ayahuasca and you show up in the high level version of Kazakh Thule. That was, hey, we took your content away.
It's true.
That can go a lot of ways. Like, can you imagine if EverQuest had done that to, say, the desert of Row, right? Like, oh man, we took the desert of Row and made it a level 78 zone.
Right.
Who's that targeting? Like, what's the purpose of that? Like, you can make your world dynamic and changing, but to what end?
Right. Yeah, and the reality is you may hit a point with certain servers and in a certain game's life cycle where you have no low level people, and so maybe it makes sense to make the Desert Row something different. But oftentimes, no, even back then, I think we were looking at like zone usage, etc., and it was like, all right, well, but we're barely seeing anybody in these zones, so it kind of makes sense to do something.
There was some load balancing we do too, like we'd move the zones to different boxes eventually and whatnot. Like, Desert of Row might be on with all the same boxes, a bunch of other low level zones that had low usage, and like the current raid zones would be on their own boxes or less intense boxes, less load.
So speaking of which, Toolrezer asked, who created the open world giant in Vanguard that when aggroed would kick you like a full chunk away in the air and you would die when landing? That was awesome.
Depends on where it is. Depends on where it is, because
weren't there 12 giants or something? The 12 giants of Torsheim that were supposed to be wandering the world.
Yes, and they were super special. There was one that I did. It was placed, but I did some of the work. I can't remember the area exactly, but it was like a forested valley, and he had a pretty good kick to him, but I don't remember him kicking people across the zones or across the chunks.
I must have had something to do with at least one of them, maybe not. I remember just the high concept. I don't remember the real deal. I mean, I'm sure I killed him as a player at one point in time too. Maybe Krosnick.
Andrew would probably
a lot of special case stuff, or maybe even Vinny.
Maybe.
No, I mean their pod really owned more of the Dark Elf stuff. He was super inspired by a Song of Ice and Fire back in the day. Like Daenerys was constantly mentioned.
It's completely off topic, but I'm super impressed with where he's gone in the industry too. Vinny has done incredibly well for himself. I'm super happy for him.
Well, he's done incredible work. So I'm
no doubt
of that
no
guy.
Doubt. God of War, the latest God of War iteration was insane.
And he just shipped Avengers as one of the combat directors. So.
Nice.
He's come a long way from the kid I hired.
Little Vinny. Yeah. Little Vinny.
He'll always be Little Vinny to me.
Yep.
So, another question. Let me pop it up here, and then I'll get back to a previous question. But this one seemed closer in topic. One of the big selling points with Vanguard, at least from my experience, was leveling 3 separate paths: adventuring, crafting, diplomacy. Were there a lot of high concepts for melding those together through quests as the game developed that never got done? And that was from Barantor.
Yes, but no. There was a lot of contention in the beginning of the product over how any and all of that would work. So there was originally the concept, and I'm 99% we never did this right, of it was going to be hat switching. So you would literally change to one of the other classes, right? And only be that. So if you wanted to be a crafter or you wanted to harvest, you had to be protected by adventurers. Like that was the original design. And like you had to like bring a diplomat down to the dungeon to parlay with the dragon in order to get an effect. But the arguments and the discussions were like, man, it's really not fun to be a non-combat character doing this stuff, like being protected all the time. Like that sucks. Like that was going to be terrible. So we didn't do that.
I'm curious, chat. Like, what do you think about that concept? Would you be okay with that if you were the diplomat? You come in, you do some diplomat shit every once in a while, but you got to be protected, or merchant.
What
do you think?
You couldn't do combat was the thing, right? Like you.
You got to rely on it. You got to rely on it. No, not really excited for it. Yeah, I love it.
Like a really good. It sounds like an interesting idea.
It's a really cool concept, and then you play it. It's kind of like semi-bad
pain.
analogy I could give is like if you've played Shadowrun ever, like the real tabletop, it's like having a decker in your party that's not a combat decker. Like we just house ruled. Like there's no deckers in our game that are not combat deckers. And also we're going to streamline decking because you know what? Basically that was, there's a portion of the game for this one guy, and then there's a portion of the game for these 5 other people. Why don't we just make one game where everyone's playing the same game?
Well, but now are you still saying hat or no hat?
That was hat switching back in the day.
So think for a second that you're diplomat X, right? And you're necessary to parlay with a dragon at the bottom of this dungeon, and it takes 45 minutes or half an hour for your team to get down to that dungeon. And during that half an hour, you're standing there just walking, going, "Please don't hit me, please don't hit me, because I can't do
cower
anything."
In fear, negative 10% of damage. Cower in fear.
Wait,
that
is that not how you play EverQuest? That kind of sounds like every character I ever play.
Sucks.
I'm usually drinking and watching television in the background.
Oh my god. No. Yeah, it sounds like a really, really interesting idea, but in actual play, it sucks.
All right, fair enough.
I mean,
I do like the idea of
seeing some stuff in here in the chat of like it could have been cool if you had like, it depends on how you're setting up the world, right? Like if you're setting up the world where you're a mighty heroic adventurer, it might be cool to have a hireling that's your diplomat, and you're leveling up your diplomat hireling, and you bring that diplomat hireling with you along with your guild and your adventuring group, and that makes the mission of effectively going down to parlay with the dragon, right? Like, okay, we're gonna do this on kind of hard mode on the way, but easy mode on the dragon fight, right? So we're gonna hard mode our way down by protecting this jerk. He's gonna do his parlay with the dragon, and that's gonna make something happen with the dragon encounter.
Yeah, it couldn't be the
killing the dragon.
Todd,
it couldn't be the sole focus. It couldn't be the sole focus is the thing. It had to be kind of like an ancillary or sub quest kind of deal to it to make it interesting in my opinion.
Yeah.
So,
but to be clear, right, the concept for Vanguard at the time, right, was at that point, right, was the hat switching. So it wasn't like, say, Anarchy Online had some classes that were themed a bit differently and could give certain buffs or modes of travel and whatnot. It really wasn't that, right? It was this very, very completely different type of gameplay that these spheres were supposed to represent that didn't intermix directly in the combat, right? Like there was no place in combat for a diplomat.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I think you could make a diplomat class that did all this sort of stuff potentially and had some combat capabilities, again, similar to AO or whatnot. But
yeah, that would actually be
the original VG system was definitely not that.
That would be way more interesting to have. So you're at least like a jack of all trades, but you focus on one as your mastery kind of deal, so that you're not completely helpless in the adventuring world. But yeah, that would be much more interesting, much more interesting dynamic.
Vanguard was when it launched, though, right? I mean, you could just have switch on the spheres and focus on one, but you couldn't really focus on all 3 of them at the same time unless you played 36 hours a day, which wasn't going to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the one example is like adventuring, harvesting, crafting. Those are ones that did kind of work together because you would adventure would open up high level areas to harvest, which then you could level up your crafting. But at the same time, for people who didn't have tons of hours to play, it was more efficient for them to focus on one of those, probably mostly adventuring, and then pick up a side sphere to do when your guild wasn't online or you didn't have a group. You could go out and harvest and do diplomacy and collect the card game, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I still got to say another feature I miss from Vanguard that I really haven't seen in other games is the group harvesting. I loved it. I love the feeling of running around the world though and being like, oh man, there's the ultra rare node. I'm going to literally put a shout out to every friend I have online of like, we got to get over here. We got to have the max number of people to harvest this so we can get the greatest amount of yield out of it, right? Because some of those resources were incredibly rare and made incredible items, right? Like, holy crap, I need more of whatever this resource is. And like, you would sometimes have these detentes of like, hey, there's another player over there and I don't know him and he's not my friend. And I've got my friends on the way. Do I just click it now? Or not? Because I don't want them to take it from me. Because the nodes were in the world and shared, not instance per party or anything.
Yeah.
To me, the diplomacy and the adventuring felt like separate spheres where the harvesting and the crafting felt sort of supplementary to the adventuring side of things, or as much as we wanted to make it 3 spheres, it just never seemed to feel that way to me. Diplomacy absolutely was. That was absolutely its own gameplay thing.
Yeah, and that we were talking about the housing stuff earlier. That's where the diplomacy was supposed to actually tie in the long term. Was you were supposed to be doing diplomacy with the peons that got attracted to your town by your group or your guild or your town, building the wonders and whatnot. Right? So you would attract the wandering master of whatever. So you let's say you built like the wondrous blacksmithy hall, right? You might attract the wondrous blacksmith there, and then you had to have diplomats do parlay with him in order to allow him to train people in specific crafting recipes. That was the original high concept, right? But those diplomats were also the only ones that could actually modify like if you think of the Sims, right? The different bars that the Sims have, the happiness and that sort of crap, right? They were the ones that were supposed to be moving those bars for the city, or that's how you move those bars as a player, right? So you would, in the land of theory, which we absolutely never got to, right? You could just go from city to city, parlaying with people and buffing the city, right? So like those bars go down over time.
No, that did get implemented to some extent.
It got implemented for the major cities, but not the player cities, right? Like you could do it in the starter zones, like you could do it in the major cities, and that would give a continent-wide buff. But it was supposed to be, I was part of Todd City, so I got the Todd Cities buffs by me buffing all those things.
Yeah, but the concept was the same. It was just
so
not fully realized.
Yeah. So I'm gonna take us completely out of this loop because I've got a question that's been sitting here. I feel guilty that I haven't hit it yet, but it's an EverQuest question. Not sure if we're gonna be able to answer it. Hashpipe asked, does anyone know who designed the greatest EverQuest city of all time, Akanon? Do you guys know? You gotta track down some of the artists and see if Kevin or somebody can help me find it.
People that are going to know are like GZ or Palacio are going to know that sort of stuff, like the original crew or Bill Trost. Because that's OG EverQuest.
If I still had access to the stuff, I could look at whose name was on the art files, I guess, but
maybe
that was...
I'm trying to think.
I
just don't know.
That's way before I was on the game, so I don't know. It's
Tom Toby, you can't dig around in there and find something for us?
It's about the style of the zone, so you can kind of like, if you envision the style of what Akanon is, you can kind of map that to other zones, and then kind of get an idea from there. Like it didn't have a cat. It didn't have a cat face in 000, so you know.
So it's not Burnsy.
Yeah.
So you start rolling out people, and you're pretty much down to a couple people.
Okay. Well, I asked.
Which we knew, but we don't.
So then, next question on the list from Ethan, and I accidentally just clicked the wrong button and made it disappear. Oh my goodness!
I just saw somebody mention Kelethin, and I was just going to say that city is why I played a barbarian, because I created a ranger initially and fell out of Kelethin and died and couldn't find my body and was like, "Fuck this place, I'm leaving."
And then as a barbarian, you got stuck in the tunnel and couldn't find your way out.
Oh dear God! No, I got stuck in the water. I fell off the little raft across there, fell in the water, and I couldn't figure out how to get out for what felt like an hour.
So I've re-added the question, but I may have like accidentally deleted some other questions. Sorry about that, guys.
Royalties.
Yeah, question.
Not royalties.
Did you guys work on a salary plus rate? Did you get a piece of each expansion that was sold as additional compensation? And royalties. At least in my experience, it was royalties.
It was royalties.
It was called royalties, but it was actually profit share.
It was discretionary bonuses given by the producers and executive producers. So this is an amazing thing that Brad did and got approved through in the beginning. So this may have changed later on once everything changed hands and we were all gone, right? But 15% of the profits of EverQuest was to be shared between the team.
Yeah, I loved it.
It was 15%. It was that actual number, and that amount would then get divided into buckets. So if you worked on the most recent expansion, that bucket was bigger. So the goal was to try and entice people to stay on the product longer and longer. So if you'd worked on everything from the beginning to the end, you had a piece from every bucket. But it was still discretionary by the producers, right, to determine what your bonus and worth was within that. So if you were a shitbag, you might get a very small number. If people really liked you, you might get a larger number. And I'm sure there was any number of games where, like, right, my salary as an associate game designer was very low, like very low, like poverty level low in San Diego, right? But I was able to double and triple my salary through those bonuses.
Right.
So when I was there, the structure had changed somewhat. Like Todd said, it was more of a. It wasn't called royalties anymore. It was called just a profit sharing. But it was all kind of the same bucket thing. So we would get a bonus of X% for shipping an expansion on time. If we got the thing done and got it out there on time, we got a certain bonus. And then quarterly we would get the profit sharing, which was based on a sliding scale based upon the number of expansions you'd worked on previously, from the current one, like he said, which was the biggest bucket, really, and then would go backwards. So like you said, if you spent more time on the team, you got more money out of it. And they weren't anywhere near the numbers that you were mentioning where you were doubling and tripling your salary anymore, but it was still not insignificant. The last year I was on EQ, my total bonus compensation, including a ship bonus and the royalties over the years, was about 50% of what my base salary was. So it was still not insignificant.
Right.
And yeah, it was nice because it was like, oh, look, here's our royalty check, and it's basically a month's worth of pay. I'm like, sweet, that's money I wasn't really counting on, so I can go out and do fun shit for the week. And it was SOE, at least in my opinion, definitely paid people pretty reasonably. I was not unhappy, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that experience may vary from person to person, but so I've always been sort
sure
of
it does.
like I've been cautious as to what I say at times, especially here, but I will say the compensation, I thought, relative to every place I've been to since, was some of the most fair, and the most like you said, you didn't want to leave the team, right? Like we not only did we not mind being on the team, we also like wanted to make sure that the people we brought on the team were worthy of being in the royalty pool, I think was always the quote, right? And so it was just one of those things where it's like, all right, well, we want to make sure that we can perform well and we can safeguard the health of this product, because this product does take care of us.
It aligned our interests with the product's interests, right? Which is always a great place to be in anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't want to leave the team necessarily because I liked the team. We had great people. I worked with great people on the team, and so
not me. It was just money. I didn't like any of you people.
I'm gonna keep plugging you on this one because you need to get Abzor on here. You need to get Vancouvering on here.
I would love to have it happen. I might be having Jonathan on this weekend. Like, I think we're right down to just finalizing the actual hour in whether it's Saturday or Sunday. But dude, it's a challenge tracking people down. You would be shocked. Like I've got some email threads that are like, and they're interesting sometimes because it's like email number 2 or message number 2. It's like, oh, that sounds cool, man. I'd like to come on. And then it's like 12 more emails from me going, all right, man, I hate being this person, right? But like, you still coming? That kind of thing. But I know also people got kids out of school right now. It's a crazy year. People like these hours aren't good for people,
And Jonathan's transitioning to a new company. And
yeah. Well, I wasn't speaking necessarily about Jonathan. He's been pretty good on getting back to me.
Yeah.
A certain person named I'll just use a nickname so maybe you'll know, like Schmed. Like, if you would just get back to me, Schmed, that would be great. But I know everybody's busy.
Nailing Schmed down on anything is difficult, man. Even when I was working with him on a regular basis, it was because he'd schedule a meeting and it's like, okay, we're gonna meet on this. We're gonna talk about this stuff at this time, and it was really I can't imagine being the position he's in, when he's running the whole studio, because it was quite often where he'd be like, hey, I got to reschedule. Hey, I got to reschedule. Sorry, man, I got to reschedule. It's like, okay, yeah, what do you do? It's
please don't spam him. That's not going to help.
No. He's dealing with 100 different irons in the fire, and it sounds like, oh yeah, it'd be awesome to run a studio, but Jesus Christ, all the details he has to deal with.
It's a whole different thing.
Holy Christ, that's just a lot of work.
Okay, so speaking of meetings, Tom Toby asked, and I'll show it. I think I didn't screw this. Okay, Tom Toby asked, were there any meetings that went, how do we make this different from EQ? Were things shot down because it was too much like EQ? I imagine finding new things to implement was really difficult. I mean, I'm assuming this is in context of Vanguard.
There weren't really a lot. It was, we were like, very core vision was we're making the spiritual successor to EverQuest, right? Like that was the mantra, that was the vision. In any cases, it was how do we evolve EverQuest, right? Evolution doesn't mean don't make it like it. It means make it that but better, or make it that but more that, right? How do you make it more EverQuest than EverQuest was? Right?
Yeah, I
can't
recall
different features with the crafting and the diplomacy at a high level, right? But
I can't recall a single meeting where anybody shot down an idea as being, oh, that's too much like EQ, because that's.
I mean, the only thing was when we switched, it was very controversial actually to switch over to having a quest system that was very much WoW inspired, right? That was very much the point and click. Like that was a huge
concession almost
on every side, right? Like. I mean, memories about having the comparisons between what we were making and what WoW was doing are kind of painful for me, right? Because I was definitely a company guy, right? Because when Brad set out the vision and Jeff set out the vision, it was, we're making this. This is what we want. Everything needs to go back to this pillar of this is EverQuest. And if you were to look at how the market was changing with what WoW was doing to the market, there's things that a lot of people on the team wanted to embrace and wanted to do. But even I had to be the fun police and like shoot those things down, right? Like you remember Vince just going like, "Oh, Bill, you're the cool police, woo, cool police," right? Like,
oh, for sure.
Yeah, because behind closed doors, right? I was literally in meetings with Brad and Jeff where I was told, if you don't do it my way, I'll find someone that does. Right? Those are not fun discussions to have with your boss and a very close personal friend of yours, right? Like that is not fun. And then you have to go out on the floor and represent, yes, we have to do it this way. And I couldn't always just use the words because Brad and Jeff said so. And then Brad and Jeff, of course, were arguing over what they both wanted as partners, right?
I think
so.
That's a tough one.
I think the toughest things to hear occasionally were just make it like WoW, because it was like then we're not really developing, we're just copying, and it's. And I'm not saying this specifically to Vanguard because I've heard it elsewhere as well. Just make it like WoW. And it's like that became sort of a sign of resignation, kind of like, all right.
I think there's.
I hated that.
I like it in some cases, and I dislike it in others. So something that Hartzman was really good at when he came on to Rift, right? Like, so he hired me on like a month after he really officially started there, right? And brought a group of people, right? But one of the phrases that he would use as the EP and the creative director or the chief creative officer of the company, right, was, guys, ask yourself this question: is this an area we're trying to innovate in? And I always found that question very insightful, right? Because if it's an area we're trying to innovate in, put thought and effort into making it innovative or different. Otherwise, you can just look at a solved solution for this, right?
I agree with that.
I think there's a bit of a difference between what you're saying and what I'm saying, Doug. Just to
I like the question in that regard, because it isn't simply just a resignation of, oh, just copy somebody else.
Yes, because he would never do that. He would never just say, just make it like WoW. He'd say, are we trying to innovate here? And he'd sometimes say, as a chief creative officer and executive producer, I'm saying, no, we're not innovating here. We're innovating over here. Spend your resources making this X new thing super awesome, because we have to test that and prove it out, while we can always fall back to like how you target monsters or target through target.
Yeah, right. I think that's really a function of the messaging versus what the actual intent is. And I think the messaging can kill that. A messaging can actually, honestly, God, kill that creativity and thing. And so, yeah, I mean, if the question had been, like you said, like Hartzman, who,
one of the greatest in the fucking industry. I'm
without a doubt.
Him so long, so
without a doubt,
So-
he's he's one of those special people too, for sure. So
Todd, before we move on though, from your angle, this topic, what do you think?
Well, so I've fought kind of on both sides of this from an engineering perspective, right? So, I know how mechanics work in other products. So it's very easy from an engineer's perspective to set up, let's just use the Quest system, right? To make it work from a technical side. The idea being that, like, I prefer to get some of those things done and make them like whatever products out there, and let the designers focus on the creative content, not the mechanics of how the Quest works.
Right.
But I have got stuck in discussions where spent literally a week discussing how the Quest bangs are going to work. Who gives a shit? Seriously, like that's in the grand scheme of your product, that's not something you worry about. Let an artist, let an engineer deal with that, and focus on the content aspects and the creative aspects.
Get it in, and we can always change it later.
Yeah, get the first version in, then see how it feels, then make adjustments from there. But I've been, there's like one of those paralysis, like, it's not designed by committee, but there's just
paralysis
this idea that you're just stuck in this decision paralysis because there's too many people doing it.
Yeah.
Like,
no decision is so much worse than the worst decision.
Yeah. Analysis paralysis or paralysis by analysis. Those, it's and again, some of that I do think, Bill, what you were hitting on though, and I think the way Scott Hartzman, like puts it out there is like, is this an area we're in? Okay, well, because that time is valuable. So yeah, just
it is.
Like, let's not try to reinvent every freaking wheel.
I guess to clarify where I was going with that though is WoW had become such a juggernaut.
Oh, I know.
Nobody ever thought any game was going to get 12.5 million subs or whatever the hell they topped out as a number, right? And so at some point, almost every game in development seemed to go down this path of, if it's not like WoW, it's not worth making. It's not just you. And it kind of stifled and squashed any kind of drive to innovate. And I completely am on board with what you're saying, Bill, about picking your battles and picking your areas to innovate. And like what Todd was just saying, who gives a shit about the quest banks and stuff? But I think they're for at least a while they're permeated this sort of mentality of, if it isn't like WoW, it's crap.
Right.
And I just
that's the business model, right? So a whole new business model after WoW, and creativity was not part of it, right? It was about, I want a piece of what WoW has, and the quickest path to there was to copy WoW and get it out the door.
Sucked.
Well, I mean, yes and no, but yes, it sucked, but at the same point, going into a product like that, you have to resign yourself if it's being driven, if the direction is being driven from the top down, and you're a creative person, you don't work for that company.
Right.
I'm not arguing with you so much as like from
no, I know exactly what you're saying.
On how you solve this problem, right? Like,
no, I know exactly what you're saying on that one, and that's exactly right. It's if you're just getting into it because you want a piece of that money pie, then you're not in it for the same reasons I was in it.
Yeah.
Right, but I mean, so many companies, like the scale, and like we all know this, right? This is just preaching to the choir, right? The scale of money to make the large scale games these days is so much. Like just the way that teams are set up, the way that everything is set up, it's a different thing. And maybe EQ even got that way eventually. I'm not sure. There's a lot of cogs in a wheel, right? Not a lot of individual ownership. Like you might have ownership over a sub feature on a large scale game these days.
So I could speak a little bit to that because one of the teams I've been interviewing with recently actually divulged to me, and their team is 710 people.
Yeah,
it's not a company. That's not a team.
No thanks.
Huh? That's split between the live and the development game, but there's 710 people on this team, and it's just like, to make one game.
And I'm sure it's a wonderful thing. I think it's great.
That's not money that's reasonable.
Yeah, I don't want to be anywhere near it personally.
No.
I'd rather have 7 people and we do our textures in Crayola. You know, like it's just I'd rather take a shot with something much smaller and cheaper.
Yeah, it just depends on it, you know, where you're at in your life, what you can do, where your funding is coming from, right? Like all of those parameters completely change how you make a game, right? Like
for sure.
So
if you live off your bank account and make whatever you want, more power to you. Make what you want, and I pray to God that there is an audience for what you are making, right?
I think that's the plus side of what WoW did with those numbers. Is I don't think anybody had any idea that the player base was potentially that big. Like that there were that many people willing to spend time playing an MMO. That's awesome to me. But
well, the reason why we get into like the niche discussion so much now, and that kind of spurred on the whole Project N thing is, you know, when we started, it was super niche, and we were like, oh wow, 500,000 people are willing to play this, and then when it got to like 10, 12 million, 15 million, and then you look at those people over time, there are 40 million people playing Dungeons and Dragons this year, right? Like this stuff. It's so there are a lot of potential customers out there these days. So maybe we can get back to the idea, and we'll get to Joppa's question after this next question. But if you watch the panel that Chris and Smed and Steven were all on, the PAX one is interesting because I think Joppa did a great job of sort of speaking to the potential of smaller, more focused titles these days because the customer base is bigger. It really just comes down to business model, right? Like how much are you spending, how much do you need to make back? So just real quick before we lose it, I've got a question up that is from Seahole. From an internal developer's perspective, what tactics do you have for arguing for an idea for a game system, and what tactics did you learn about after an unsuccessful proposal that could have helped you sell your idea?
That's good.
Some things that work and then don't work are being an asshole and being the loudest person in the room.
Does that work or not work?
It works once or twice, and then it no longer works.
Oh, damn it.
Right? It can work, but I don't suggest it. You get branded an asshole. I've been known as an asshole. These guys have worked with me. I've been an asshole before. I was much younger, right? It was a long time ago. But being the loudest guy in the room isn't the best answer. It's never the best answer. Being passionate about it.
Phrase this,
passionate and fighting for it and having good responses to the holes that people poke in it, and trying to figure out if, right, like you have to be able to murder your own darlings. So like you might think this is the greatest system ever and you're in love with it.
That's it.
Great. Does anyone else care about this actually? You have to take yourself out of your own view on it, right? You have to see the reactions of other people, and I don't want to just say pivot, right? But figure out what it is that you actually love about it that other people would love about it, and then get rid of all the stuff that they don't, or just go prototype it as quickly as humanly friggin' possible and put it in front of people, because like that's the real argument there.
The hardest lesson to learn in game development, in my opinion, is on the design side, is not to be so married to your ideas that you're not open to listen to comment and criticism from those around you with different viewpoints, because you may walk in with this document and this idea that you think is just the shit, and you hand it off to people and you go, what do you think about this? And they go, not really too happy with this. And if you're not capable of listening to that, you get branded an asshole, like especially if you just start yelling back at people. That never works. You're never going to sell somebody on an idea by yelling at them. You're never going to get people on board with what you're trying to do by shouting them down. And that's a really difficult lesson to learn. I was guilty of it early on in my career as well.
So actual yelling or just mean words? Were you using mean words?
Literally, how stupid are you that you don't understand? How can you not be? How are you so stupid that you don't understand that this is a great idea, kind of thing? And
you're a bunch of young dudes or really passionate dudes in a room, and it's not a very corporate culture, right? Or you haven't had enough experience working with other people long enough, right? Like you don't. It's easy to get into ad hominems, which is stupid. Just don't do ad hominems, right? You should never be debating the person. You're debating the idea. You're all trying to solve a problem together, right? Like that's what you're trying to do. What are we here to do? We're here to entertain players. I think X way is a great way to entertain players. I think players will have this sort of experience with it, right? So you're not arguing your idea versus them or them versus you. It's what the hell are the ideas? How do we make this better?
It unfortunately can feel that way, though.
A successful tactic, and this is a challenge to do, guys, and I've done it a number of times in my career, is you convince someone else that the idea was theirs.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true.
Jedi mind trick.
You manage up, and then the up comes back down to you, and then the you to spread to other people, or vice versa, on any number of lunches of, hey, that idea you mentioned, Doug, that's pretty cool. What if we did X with that idea that you had, Doug?
Oh yeah.
Man, can you imagine what would happen when you do this, Doug? Oh, that'd be great.
It sounds shitty, but that's absolutely true.
So Todd, why are both of these guys wrong?
I don't want to say they're wrong. I think there's definitely lots of ways to approach it. I saw one of the comments in here about, if you ask a programmer, they're going to tell you no a lot. No is a good answer, and here's why. A lot of times when someone responds very quickly with no, what they're saying is they don't have time to think about it right now, or your idea. But that doesn't mean they don't think about it. A lot of times, even I've done this, and I think a lot of programmers and other people do this too, not necessarily just programmers, but they dwell on that thought, and then they're like, man, I was an asshole. I was Bill Fisher. Let me think about this a bit more. And then, I'll ping them at lunch or something like that. So really, in my mind, the key thing is to just get that thought out there. Like you guys were basically talking about more active, like, collaboration, but just get the thought seated, right? And then if it is a good idea, chances are it's going to, slowly mature and grow. And as long as you are still passionate about it, other people will get passionate about it. I mean, that's kind of maybe too preachy, but I think it has worked.
I've heard no a lot, so I'm used to it.
Yeah. But don't stop at no. No is pretty much means that person's already busy, not that they don't like your idea.
Yeah, and if you stop with one no, I'm curious, like how invested you were in that concept.
Sometimes.
So
sometimes no really is no.
Sometimes no means no, Doug.
If the idea really sucks, I'll give you more than just no.
That's true.
Todd will definitely give you more than no.
Yeah. I mean, I've had to tell people no before too when their idea is so bad that it doesn't warrant further consideration. But yeah.
All right. So new question. This one is from Japa. Question: in retrospect, what are the areas you believe Vanguard was able to achieve a measure of innovation? And possibly related, what aspects of Vanguard are you most proud of?
I'm most proud that we actually shipped the product during a time period when any number of companies were trying to make MMOs and never actually shipped them. So it was not the greatest game in the world. It was great to many of us. A lot of us loved it, played the hell out of it, but we crossed the finish line. And crossing the finish line is so much more important than any number of other things. Because once it's out there, if you've got the wherewithal, you can improve that product. You can make that thing better. But there's plenty of companies and titles that are just dead on the side of the road that never got to go anywhere. And that is a fucking achievement, people. Like, if you've not worked in the game industry, it is a goddamn achievement to go from concept to ship.
Actually getting something out the door is something that people who haven't been in the industry don't realize just how many things have to fall into place to actually happen. It's not, and I don't mean fall into place like luck. I mean, it's just pure hard work to get something, like Bill said, from concept to out the door. Even it is not simple. And for every game that ships, there's probably 10 that just die. But as far as for me, I think Vanguard took some risks and innovated in some class design areas that other games maybe still haven't. And I'm most proud of the work that I did on that game, getting it out the door, honestly, just because it was such a whirlwind of work and emotion and learning, and I'm incredibly proud that it got out the door. But I think Vanguard actually did take some innovation in class design more than the simple stuff that, the D&D tropes. It did some new things, which is always in a world where there's I hate to say it, there isn't a lot of room for innovation anymore because so many things have already been done.
Right.
To actually be able to do that is pretty incredible. Pretty incredible.
I think I want to say one other thing I'm really, really proud of with Vanguard. Looking at it in retrospect, right? Like almost 20 years later, sort of thing. It was
15.
some of the people, right? The people that we gave shots to that have gone really amazing places, right? You look at the Andrew Krasniks of the world, the Vince Napolis of the world, any number of these guys that have cut their teeth on this, and they've just said, from there, they've taken that passion for game development and gone so far and become so good out of the flames of that. I mean, absolute PTSD to me inducing experience.
Right.
It was a firestorm for sure.
Well,
sorry, 1 second. I gotta deal with my other job for a second here.
Yeah. So,
I mean, Vanguard for me opened up a lot of it's going to sound really silly and cheesy, but it opened up a lot of self-development for me on how to interact with people that just in ways that collaborative efforts like that. In previous jobs, I was never working in a collaborative environment like that. And so there was a lot of personal growth that came out of it that was further enhanced on EverQuest, but it was also the first time I'd ever been in an environment where you had literally everybody around you. Nobody was mailing it in. It was passionate development, and that passion boils over sometimes into emotional interaction. I'm surprised that the last 6 months of Vanguard, I'm surprised there weren't people literally out in the parking lot beating the shit out of each other sometimes, because it was such a highly charged environment. And I don't mean that to say like we all hated each other, because we certainly didn't. But when you have all those people that are passionate about what they're doing and
under pressure, right? It's under incredible.
Yeah. It was a highly charged environment, but I learned a lot of how to interact with other people from that, and that has definitely taken me further in EverQuest. When I was over it, as silly as it sounds, but when I was over in Afghanistan, in that kind of high pressure situation, I was able to cope with a lot of things that other people weren't, because I'd been through the trenches in the game development world. It's really dumb, but I was able to take what I had learned in that Vanguard development pressure cooker, and it helped me stay sane in a war zone. So,
well, yeah,
it was not an insignificant thing.
It was, and it's weird because even within the same company, then going over to the Austin studio for DC Universe, there was something, I don't know if maybe it was just something that sort of grew out of the San Diego culture or what, but it sounds like, I mean, what you're describing with regards to Vanguard and then coming back into EQ, like EQ is very much that place as well, where it was, I mean, discussions were extremely passionate. Like everybody, like just was constantly sort of driving and pushing ideas, and no matter like how tough some of those conversations were, I know then we were also equally passionate about like someone's throwing a party that weekend or whatever. The team was all there, everybody's drinking, maybe still talking a little bit of shit about the one thing that you're arguing about earlier, but then kind of smacking each other on the back a little bit and kind of like, all right, well, you know what I mean? Like there was an energy there that I really haven't seen. Yeah, it was weird. It's a camaraderie, like esprit de corps.
Really was going, like, not literally, right, but the phrase, right, going to war with people, right? You were under a lot of pressure. You had to deliver things. Everyone was working towards a common goal separately, right? In many cases, right? Because we owned the zones back in the day, right? Like we owned that zone. It was ours. Everything about it when I was working on EverQuest, that was mine. Outside of the art, right? Like I owned it. Yeah, but I mean,
that shared strife is what builds that shared understanding and teamwork. Yeah.
It's weird because one of the other things that I've mentioned though, and maybe they weren't related for you guys, but I've referenced that period of time a lot in companies since then. But I've also referenced the need for a sense of investment as well, right? And so I was like,
oh yeah,
I
Oh,
felt
yeah.
like we worked insanely hard there. Some of the hardest work I've ever done in my life. But when I got my check every quarter, that was like, the royalty check or whatever, like I felt like the company cared, right? Like, and so I also felt just a huge sense of pride just in the product that we're making, right? Working on a new product like Vanguard, I have to assume that you feel a sense of equity just in the sense that you're there helping create the initial company, and I assume if things go great, there's some hope for in the future that you get something out of that as well. How important is that, do you guys think?
I mean, being invested in what you do is the difference between a paycheck and a career, I think.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You
Right. You
when
can
I
do
was
any number of
over,
things to just make money, but what's the like?
I
I'm not a religious guy, and I don't want to get too preachy about this sort of stuff. But like one of the things I've dealt with in my personal life over the years of like when I've taken time out of the industry or I'm not working on a project, there's like this hole missing in me, and I don't have anything else to fill it with because
Right.
the creative process and putting stuff in front of people and working with people and arguing with people and doing all of that stuff, that's kind of what fills that hole for me, I guess. And I know that
yeah.
at times I've had to struggle with that, right? Because when I'm not doing that, I'm not necessarily happy. Like I can throw myself at playing games or doing stuff with my family, any number of things, but I mean, maybe it's just chasing that high that I had from the
That
early days, right?
is exactly the reason why I'm coming back to the industry now, is because I took 5 years out and went and did something else that paid me ridiculously well, enough so that I've been off work since I've been home since April, so that's now 5 months that I haven't been doing a damn thing, and I'm in no danger of being in financial jeopardy in any way right now because of the work that I did over in Afghanistan. But um, that be creative now, go intensity and passion thing, that's missing, and that is exactly, Bill hit it square on the head. Being invested in something takes it out of the realm of simply being a paycheck,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
nothing I have ever done has given me that same feeling that game development has. Nothing, not even close.
So, quick random question for you guys. Do any of these guests stream on Twitch or other platforms? Can people find more of you somewhere? And that was from Ixar Monkey.
I'm a very private person in general, so me even being on here at all is a little bit of a strange thing. Like
And we
I've
thank
been
you
invited
for
to
it.
go, speak at events and whatnot, and I generally don't like doing it, but because I know you personally and I like you guys and I haven't seen you guys in years, that's why I'm here doing this. Right?
Yeah,
I'm not I'm not a self promoter. Let's put it that way.
This is okay because this is an ad hoc conversation, but I do not like public speaking at all.
Me neither.
So the public speaking thing for me, I have actually come to enjoy the speaking part of it, the interaction with people. But I'm not a streamer. I look at the people who live their life on, and I'm not trying to say anything about what you're doing on this thing,
Uh-huh.
Sean, because this is really
Uh-huh.
cool. I'm serious. No,
Steady.
I look at people who
Caution.
live on social media as some sort of a freak, because that's just like, I'm like,
Oh, that's true.
it's the idea that Facebook has given everybody a platform, and now everybody thinks they have something interesting to say. And for the reality is, no, most of us don't have anything at all worthwhile hearing or saying. So
If you want to hear me say something interesting to you about game design or development, you can hire me and you can pay me money to do that.
I mean, that's another side of it too.
That's kind of part of it for me. I've always felt that way. Like there are many people that like to share all of their trials and tribulations with the world and like publish stuff out there to get different jobs or whatever. Like it's always felt weird to me when people do that. I understand why people do it. I get it.
So I couldn't be a media whore like some of these people I see out there.
I mean,
I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
like Twitter is literally a loaded gun that you're pointing at your head every day if you post something on Twitter.
Yeah, you gotta be careful on that one.
You can say something and it'll be completely misinterpreted, right? Like, oh my God, X, Y, and Z, they think that, or they're really dumb because they said X, and they don't.
And
you
the
don't
mob
get the full
descends on you.
context, right? You don't get the full context of what's going on. Like, I don't really want to engage in arguments with random users on the internet. As a game developer, when you're running a product, I'm happy to chat with players of the product I'm making. I love that. I absolutely love that. But I'm not out there to be like Bill Fisher, the self-promoter. Let me feel good about myself by telling everyone about what I did this weekend or whatever, or whatnot. Like that's just not. So yeah, you can't really find much of me.
Yeah, I don't have a lot out there. The only thing I'm doing lately is I've become really passionate about mountain biking, and so I've been doing some videos of places I've gone and things I've done, and I've been talking to a friend of mine who runs a pretty popular channel about kind of contributing here and there a little bit from my perspective, because I am not your typical cyclist physically. I'm 6'5", I'm 280 pounds, I'm not a small guy, so me riding around on a mountain bike doing downhill stuff is kind of out of the ordinary. But that's about the extent of it. That and my flying stuff, but I mean that's way in the past. So
holy crap,
yeah,
you're huge. I didn't realize it. You look normal size in the picture. Look at you. You're
dude, I'm a big
freaking
dude.
giant.
Half giant dude, trust me, he's a half giant.
So
amazing.
Yeah, I terrorized a couple of guys at Big Bear Bike Park a couple weeks back, because when I go downhill on the mountain bikes and stuff, I kind of let things go and just kind of barrel down. And so coming up on people, at a pretty good rate of speed, there's a little bit of terror.
Especially if you got your shirt off, you just look like some sort of Sasquatch levitating through the. Okay.
Nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to see that.
I was joking with my wife. I was going to come on the stream shirtless, and she was like, "Yeah, just normalize shirtless dads." And I was like, "That's probably not a good move."
Yeah. Oh, it's good. Yeah. So I don't feel too bad, because coming on here, because I realize it's just only a few of my closest friends, and no one's really going to see this, so it feels fairly normal. It doesn't feel too media hoary, but what are you going to do? Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not out there trying to like somebody put it in there, like I hit the like button and subscribe. Like, no, fuck that shit. That's not me.
You can't get it?
For that at all.
All right.
No.
That was my chat bot, Doug. Don't pick on my chat bot.
Yeah, that ain't happening.
So, all right. The next question is posted from Arrow TV. Do you think a game with a scope like Vanguard would be much more obtainable, especially? Oh, crap. It's hard to read under that. Especially with SSD hardware and new methods to seamlessly load new content. Look at Skyrim. Also, refactor and bring back Vanguard, please.
Well, yeah, I mean, I loaded Vanguard up about 2 years ago when I was still at Daybreak. It's night and day difference between when it originally released. So, yeah, the short answer is yes, hardware solves 99% of the problems that Vanguard had technically at the time.
It doesn't solve the content creation problems that Vanguard had. And when I say content, I mean the bespoke, as much as I hate that word, right? Like the hand-placed, the handcrafted everything. That is a different problem. Tools can make that better, but also sometimes the better you make the tools, as we kind of talked about, the more intricate the things that designers want to make are. And many designers that I've worked with over the years, myself included at times, right, fall into the trap of making an interesting thing for them, not always making an interesting thing for the player. Like it's sometimes there becomes this game, and I really hate it, where designers are making a piece of content that's fun for them to make because they want to challenge themselves technically or scripting wise or creativity wise.
Right.
I think that is like one of the greatest sins of all.
What was the place that Vinny made that had like it was like the inside of a Doom map? It had like the quad damage and the rocket packs and all that shit.
That was
something
actually
like that.
Cool. Yeah.
That felt pretty out of place.
It felt out of place, but he was trying to push the limits of things.
For sure.
In the right way. What I'm talking about is literally the act of building it is what the person kind of gets off on.
Oh, right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Zenimet was a whole thing. He was going, I see where he was going, like from a vision standpoint, right, of trying to make this mighty experience, trying to make Metroid in the game effectively.
Yeah.
It was
one of the problems with the scope of Vanguard, obviously, is the landmass size and having to fill it with things, right? And so when you have to fill it with things, you're not filling it with good content. You're just filling it with things to take up space. And then obviously you can try to go back later on and make it more personable and more exciting to do, but a lot of times that doesn't happen. Like there's in Vanguard, the last time I remember, there was still entire dungeons that were populated with just base pop.
Yep.
No story, no name, no quest, nothing.
Yeah.
And you go in there and you spend an hour in there, you're like, wait, I haven't seen anything different. In fact, if they dropped loot, that was probably a bonus. So that's one of the problems with a scope of a product. In my mind, I mean, I want to say it's more ideal to start out with something small, personal, all the content being individually created, and not just by necessarily designers. Get your artists, your engineers with any creative bone in them creating content, because you'll actually have more diverse content if it's not all just populated by one person or a small group of people.
Yeah.
Let an artist do base pop. Who cares, right? I mean, that's what the first 3 expansions of EverQuest is that collaboration between an artist, designer, and a programmer to do the stuff they needed. There wasn't any. It wasn't until later that it was more of like a mass item and mass NPC creation stuff.
Right.
The aside to that I was going to mention when you talk about scope of product is, I've seen this a lot. Actually, anybody who's ever worked on a game has seen this on an MMO side of things. You ship something out to the players and they consume it in a month or 2, and they're like, how the hell did you set the I beat this game in less than a month? And it's like, there's no way that developers can crank out enough content to satisfy the pace of some players these days, and especially if you're going into handcrafted shit. The more time I spend on an intricate quest line or an intricate zone, you're going to consume that way faster than the time it takes me to implement it. So that's a tough balance, and it's. So I like what it's hard. It's just hard.
Not to counter either of those points. But then I've also got to look at like the idea that you're going to keep that sort of that top 1% or 5% or whatever of players that can burn through everything instantly. Keep them always fed rather than just go, well, if they churn, right? Is there something there, right? Is there something to be said for continuing to focus on retaining them through additional content development versus maintaining the mass?
So something I've seen over and over is like, I did the math on Rift for like what it took to make a raid zone, for example, right? Which is obviously elder game content, right? That is for 15% of the player base or less, right? If you're lucky, right, you get up to raid numbers of 15%. And the bottom line is like, it doesn't math out to just make it for those people, but the ongoing like marketing effect of that content, of having something for people to strive for, was 100% worth it, right?
Right.
Because it costs a lot of money for the scale of a game of Rift or WoW to make that content, right? Like you can do the spreadsheet numbers and all that crap and say, oh, this cost us $400,000 or something. Was it worth it just for those people? No, not directly, but the indirect benefits are there.
Right.
So yes, making stuff for these people that consume stuff, making, I don't want to simplify it just to grinds, right? But making ways for them to continue to improve their character, to grind, to have a reason to log in every day is absolutely important. You want to keep those elder players around. You want them to re-engage with your product every day. You want them to engage with low-level people. You want them to roll new characters or have new experiences or teach other people.
That's the key. I think the key thing there is that you need to create something where your customer feels like part of the world. That even if something released, it's not necessarily geared towards them, they'll still want to come and see it, right? If it's not raid content, say it's a new quest line or something like that, it's getting players to be part of your world that will always get them to come back. The streamers out there, they're streaming their products, they have no loyalties to your product at all. So targeting them specifically can be risky. I mean, you can obviously win from a social standpoint or free social media standpoint. It drives a lot of people to your product, but if you cater to them, to their every whim could be kind of disastrous too.
So, I mean, early in my EQ playing, it was driven by Fires of Heaven. Like, I mean, it's going to sound kind of corny, but like I was not at that level of a player at the time. I was just kind of dicking around with a couple of friends of mine. We were playing EQ. We were, leveling up slowly. But Fires of Heaven was out doing things and posting items from places they'd been, and that drove me to want to keep pushing myself. So those outliers, that 1%, as you called it, the really top end tier guilds, were not something I was likely to be involved with anytime soon, and I was later on. But
you lived vicariously through them. You saw this is the potential I have. If like it's like a basketball player, you watch Michael Jordan play, and you're like, he's amazing. And you go out and you play some hoops, and you're like, yeah, I feel awesome. I can almost dunk, right? You're not Michael Jordan, but you have the idea in your mind, I could be Michael Jordan, right? Same thing with esports, right? You watch like Faker or somebody, and you're like, holy crap, I could be that guy. No, you probably can't, but the illusion is there that you could. And in EverQuest, if you wanted to be Fuhrer, you could have been, right? If you dedicated yourself to that and you wanted to organize people and herd cats and do that, you could, right? Like EverQuest was not that complicated from a raid standpoint. And I think Alex, Fuhrer put it best. He said, EverQuest is the greatest RTS I've ever played in my life. Right? Because for him, it was an RTS, right? It was peons do all this stuff, right? So
the mod rod boxes for the wizards.
So speaking, almost a good transition here, but I'm gonna make the move on it. Dantron asks, do you see a future for games that are similar to the slow-paced, less intense battle system similar to EQ? Made a joke here before. I want an MMO that's chat room with dragons, but do you think there's a viable market for something like that?
Yes, I think there is a viable market for that if you build it correctly. You build it small enough scale.
I really think there is still maybe a market for what the original intent for the Vanguard combat system was, which was that point counterpoint, more strategic combat involvement feel than just the mash buttons as fast as they're available kind of deal that that so many MMOs have gone to today.
So speaking of niches, I want to bring up a niche that I think is potentially interesting, and that is the concept of grammars, right? So older gamers, and I don't necessarily mean the older gamers that are old right now. I'm talking about us in 5 years, in 10 years, etc. Like I turned 41 yesterday, right? So I'm not that old, but right, like when
I'll be 53 this year. You can shut up.
When I'm 70, right? Like, what am I going to want to be playing? Because I'm still going to want to be playing video games, and I'm not going to want to be playing Call of Duty.
No.
That's not my thing.
I'm not going to be able to play, like how I played Rift, right? With the super complicated, the rotations, right? Like hyper complicated rotations, and you basically have to be Chopin to be amazing at this game, right? Like, that's not going to be for me. It's probably, for me, going to go back to basically like MUDs, right? Where I'm typing cast spell every so often, or EverQuest, where I'm clicking the button and waiting and stuff happens. Am I there for it yet? Is the audience there big enough for that yet? Maybe, but I think there's an interesting place that we all, in a selfish standpoint, as a gamer, should be looking. Because those of us that grew up, right, the Oregon Trail generation, we're here. Games are mainstream. They're part of our lives for many of us, and they're going to need to be. And the kids today, quote unquote, the kids today, the 15, the 20-year-olds, right? Like, they don't want to hop into EverQuest. They don't. It's not the game for them, right? They want something fast-paced and X and Y and Z. But
I would say, how about this? Maybe the majority of them. But there's so many of them now that I think if you had that environment where you've already, and this is a bit self-serving because like we've actually broke these down into these are our target demographics, etc. But like, so basically, as you described it, it's a great term, the grammars, right? Like the graybeards that started on EQ and got into EQ because of MUDs or because of D&D, etc. They're going to, we are going to look for a place that kind of comes back and has that feel. And it's like, it's essentially, as Dantron's saying, we've used that phrase a bunch, chat room with dragons, and I don't mind grinding on shit. I don't mind grinding faction stuff because it's very easy. It's meditation for me. But there'll be those people there. I think if you make something that's interesting and dangerous as well, a little bit punishing, something that is something closer to old EQ, there's going to be a fraction of that Minecraft generation that's looking for a place. Because we've seen now there's a lot been written on Fortnite as people's third place. They go there and they hang out there more than anything. And you see that's the business, that is where Epic's going with that.
I mean, I think that's really true actually with like Roblox. Like Roblox, if you look at the kids that are like the actual kids that are playing that game, right? That is truly their third place, way more than Fortnite is, right? Like they go there just to futz around, screw around, and do what kids do. They just fuck around, right?
Yep.
Like they just.
And there's
They play really
160
basic
million
games.
of them.
Yeah.
160 million MAU, just Roblox, right? So if you've got a business model,
Roblox isn't that the players can make their own content. It's that this is a place that people can call their home.
exactly.
Right? It's the place where everyone, like when I was growing up, right, we'd play with the neighbor kids, and we go down to the vacant lot at the end of our place with a bunch of sticker bushes, and that's where we'd spend hours on end, right? I think Roblox is that for a lot of kids these days.
Absolutely. And so when
Yeah.
you look at business models, though, when we say niche, like I've been trying to look at numbers of what's the payback window on an MMO that's got a monthly subscription and 20 to 30,000 subscribers, right? Like, so how much you need to spend up front and what's that payback window? And the thing is, if you spend a couple million in
You should ask
development,
Fred for those spreadsheets, because I'm pretty sure that was like the target numbers for EverQuest 1 was like 3 months with 10,000 people playing.
so I've got those spreadsheets, not his. I've made my own over the years, right? Looking at that, and it's interesting because it's like it's a fast payback window if you get 20,000 subs, and that's for a couple million in development. And in theory, like these days, if you're making a smaller game, you can actually get some shit done for a couple million. You don't need 20 million or 100 million or 200 million. So
and your middleware nowadays is so good that you can eschew a lot of that development cost by using an Unreal or a Unity to kind of get you in the ballpark down early, in that early development stage where you're not having to spend a lot of money to get engineers like Todd to build you an engine and build you tools, because those are already there. There's a lot of head start available now that there wasn't before.
Yeah, I'd rather.
I do that. I don't want to build an engine or
No,
tools.
I'd rather Todd be working on other features.
I'm just saying that's not
Exactly.
even really a necessity anymore where it was before.
So, kind of in the same vein, it's a nice transition to the next question, which is, how do you feel about emulators continuing your games? And the reason why I say that is I've been really encouraged by seeing what the people who do sort of the reverse engineering of games and building emulators have pulled off in the MMO space, and what that says about potentially smaller scale development. So, but how do you feel about the emulators that have continued the dead titles?
If the game is actually dead,
Yeah.
right? If the game is actually dead, and I'm not representing company here, right? I don't mind it so much. But if I was at a company, I would have to say, no, this is terrible. We have to defend our IP no matter what, right? So
yeah, same boat.
two different messages, right?
If the game is no longer available, in other words, or no longer in active development, I love them. I think they're fantastic. Run wild with it. Go nuts. But if the game still exists, I would rather that effort be put into improving the existing game, because an existing game is still people's livelihoods. It's still people's investment. It's still people's work. And so it feels like to me, and I'm sure I've been kind of vocal on this as well. For example, with the emulators on EverQuest, when EverQuest is still a game and there's people out there making like P99, I know SOE or Daybreak had embraced those guys, but to me it felt like stealing from me, because I was working on that game, and I was still I would have rather had people work with us to make our game, the actual game, what they were looking for, as opposed to just going off and trying to do their own thing. And that's I liken it to a tribute band for a band that still exists. It's like, go the fuck away.
Interesting, Todd. I don't want to cut you off, but I have some opinions on this one as well now.
Yeah, I mean, so I kind of like in the okay, it's okay, and the no, it's not okay. Like from both those guys is that I understand the aspects behind P99. The interesting aspect is that Daybreak or SOE at the time refused to embrace the classic model. So the mindset back then was it's always going forward. No, we're not going to go sync a code base from 2001 and resurrect a game model behind it. And that's originally why P99, well, I shouldn't say it was really embraced. It was just not actively squashed. But now that EverQuest is back into, TLP servers, a classic mode, I'm actually really surprised that, Daybreak hasn't brought the legal hammer down on it a bit more, because now it is more competing directly with their models. Now, for other games that just don't exist anymore, to me, it sucks that we have to go through the emulators. Like, in my mind, we've had this discussion, Sean, plenty of times. There needs to be an outlet for companies to put their IP and their product in the hands of a custodian to some extent that can run and maintain those products and keep them a bit more, I don't want to say official, but, with something like a Project 99, a P99, or any other emulator that's ran, it could just disappear tomorrow, right? And any time and effort you put into that is lost.
Right.
So my idea behind it is, an official company that maintains these products, and they live in the cloud, and they're just never going to go away, right? Someone could play them 100 years from now, and they would still be viable products. Maybe not viable products, but you could see your character you could see your grandson's character if he just has account info or something like that, or grandfathers, I should say. But basically, the idea is they just live on forever.
So the MMO version of good old games, like GOG kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's just something to maintain service. So one of the things that we had talked about a little bit was, and this was part of the idea when I was thinking of, would it be interesting now to try to start a niche product and create a company, was, all right, so assume it does well using like that old EQ business model. Somehow it does EQ again and has profits. One of the things that we were talking about was, I would love to start a nonprofit with those profits to help basically do that sort of like archivism. Like, can we get something like that up? But at the end of the day, you've got to have some sort of money to be able to access this IP and get it into, you know what I mean? Like,
bandwidth's not free, systems aren't free.
They're relatively free, though. The concern isn't maintaining the product. The concern is what Sean had mentioned is how do you access IP? It is surprisingly difficult for something that should be super simple. And the issue is there's just no way, there's no current model in place from a business standpoint where a company can just say, so let's use Daybreak as an example. We could use any company, but we'll use PlanetSide 1 as an example.
I just want to hop in for a second because I have to bail. I'm actually 20 minutes over.
I just realized we're at 2 hours and 20 minutes in.
I love this conversation. I really want to do this again.
Absolutely.
This whole year has been, as for everyone, right, really taxing. Being stuck in the house, everything else, not getting to hang out with friends. So this really helped my soul right now. So thank you guys.
Thank you for being here, dude.
It was good. It's good to see you and talk to you again, Bill. It's been way too long.
Maybe someday we'll end up, was it Mexicali, 105 degrees out, getting some tacos.
I'm all about it.
Great. That sounds great right now.
Anyways,
all right, Bill.
Anyways, love you guys, and everyone out there in Chatland, have a great day.
Thanks, Bill.
We'll figure out when we do this again. Bye-bye.
See you, dude.
So, to kind of touch on what Todd was talking about real quick there, I can think of a couple of games, at least in the SOE spectrum, that I would love to see come back, and Vanguard being one, Swig being another. But the problem with like a game like Swig is, if you make money on that in any way, I guarantee you, LucasArts is going to be coming with their hand out. And so, how do you get around IPs like that? Because that's a game that I would play today if it was still in existence. I would be there again.
They've got an emulator up though, right?
Pre-NGE, sorry.
So those definitely have more IP roadblocks, but if you take a simple one like, we'll just use Free Realms, or even
that's another one,
or PlanetSide 1, there's no issues with the IP other than the parent company in that extent, but there's no easy way for them to let go. Let go isn't the right word. One second, bud.
Nice.
Yeah.
He's living the life we all want.
Yeah.
Just running around in our underwear, not giving a damn about anything.
Oh, you mean you're not in your underwear right now?
No,
Am I the only one?
I'm fully dressed, sir.
That's funny. So there isn't a outlet, right? So if daybreak model, say for example, hey, we don't want to shut down Plant Site 1 because it's going to give us lots of bad press. We don't want to shut down Just Survive because it's going to get a lot of bad press. There's no easy way to transition that product to something that can maintain it, right? You're still the publisher, you still own the IP, but from a maintenance perspective, there's customer service, development, all the other stuff. It's just not cost effective for the original creator of that product to maintain it anymore. They want to work on something new. They want to move all those developers onto a new product. But there's always people, and there's even people in this chat, they're like, how do I get into the game industry? How do I begin to work on this stuff? If there was like this other company, you're like, hey, we need people who just help us maintain existing products. Maybe you played Squig, maybe you played Free Realms. Wouldn't it be awesome for you to help us create some new items or just help maintain the servers, right? There's kind of like that in, and then you can move on from the company. Anyways, I'd love to somehow form something like that. It's just, I have a full-time job, so until I don't have that full-time job, I can't do something like that. But and I definitely have conversations with the owners of some of these IPs about that, and it's very difficult. I haven't been able to make any headway in obtaining anything that I could run.
So I wonder if it's difficult to do because it's never been done. And I wonder if it isn't as simple as, like an SOE or a Daybreak with, let's say, Free Realms, just literally saying, we own it all, but here, and just here's your drive full of all of the data to stand up a server and a client, and just go here. Like, why is that so? What is the roadblock to making that simple?
I had that conversation very not too long ago, and it's the unknowns, right? So when you hand over proprietary content to someone, even if it's a trusted person, right, another entity, you just don't know what's in that content and how it could affect your company long term. And this mainly goes to code, right? So the code aspects of things, because once you transfer that proprietary content to someone else, you start to begin the process of losing control over it. Now you can set up the entire legal framework up to support that, but say for example, someone handed over the Free Realms content or maybe the EQ Classic content to a team, and then they lost access to it. And now the entire community, not saying this is necessarily bad, has access to what the product was at some point in time. And they can run their own servers, set up their own GitHubs, do whatever. Not saying that's bad, but from an IP perspective, that's what defines these companies, is their inventory of IPs. And once that starts to happen, they lose some of that ownership.
I guess my problem with that is if you're not running the game, the game's not live, what are you losing? You're not losing anything. You're not losing ownership over that's like I'm losing ownership over a dead product. It seems...
Well, but but then on the flip side,
it's kind of silly.
That's what makes it so frustrating, right? That type of conversation, and I've made that argument multiple times, and I've hit a roadblock on various products I've tried, and I think it's really going to come down to is the only way this is going to happen is to form a company that is, has reputable people that are working on it and money.
Yeah.
I don't know what that money is. It's not going to be free. Even if you say, hey, we're going to publish on your platform, or you still maintain IP, we're just going to, there needs to be something in there tangible for them to make it worth their while. I haven't found anyone. Well, actually, I know one person who's super generous who would be like, yeah, Todd, here's all the products that you want. His name is Smed. But unfortunately, Smed's not in control of those anymore. So.
Yeah, and I I just don't understand the roadblock when so many things we've seen in the world go open source. You could literally just go open source. We're not responsible for it anymore, but our players love it. Here, take it and run with it and go and have fun. Like, it doesn't harm their brand any. If Free Realms was open source tomorrow, or Swig was open source tomorrow, and people ran with it, it wouldn't hurt the brand. It wouldn't hurt the original IP holders. It wouldn't hurt anything in any way.
It just comes down to the individual IP holder, right? Like, so
Yeah, it does.
you know, I can't speak for, you know, what is it at this point, Disney?
Yeah,
but I could see how that one's not gonna fly. On the flip side, I think the difference in just sort of individuals potentially that are at the end of the day, the ultimate sort of arbiter of that decision. Some people, like Todd just mentioned, you know, a SMED might be like, hey, all right, so yeah, let's do it, whatever. Whereas I think other times people look at it and go, if you want this thing that I have, right? It's kind of like, I can imagine you go into it. I just had this weird image of like a dusty highway side pawn shop slash bar slash, you go in there and it's kind of like, there's like stuffed chupacabras and like random shit and horseshoes and bowling balls, and you come in and you're like, how much is this bowling ball? And it's like, that thing's been sitting there forever. You should get it out of their way. So one person may go, just take that shit out of here. But the other, why do you want it? How much is it worth to you? Well, it's worth $5 to me. Well, then it must be worth at least $15. If it's worth $5, I know you're full of shit. What are you going to do with it, right? Like, so if that has value to you, it has even more value to me.
I think the difference with a SMED kind of a person on that one is SMED's a gamer, and so he would probably be of the side that, like, he still loves games, and so having that game that we poured blood, sweat, and tears into being alive again would be a cool thing, just for the sake of it being a cool thing and being alive again. Whereas a company like Disney, they're all 100% money focused, and so they're not going to let a Star Wars IP in any shape or form live if they're not profiting off of it. So,
which is, it makes it even stranger. Like, the Swig emulator exists and hasn't been like, ninjas haven't come and like shut that thing down or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
So, anyways, I gotta get going too.
All right, guys.
Yeah, it's fine.
We're at 2.5 hours, so.
Yep, that went faster, a little faster than I thought it was going to.
Thank you very much for like an inaugural first time we're trying to have multiple people on. I think it's fantastic. So we're gonna try this format some more.
All right, great chatting with you guys. Nice seeing you, Todd.
Yeah, you too, man.
All right. See you guys.